Hey everyone, it's Reed. Before we get started, I just want to say thanks to everybody that's listened and everybody that worked on behalf of democracy and decency this fall. It didn't work out, guys, but that doesn't mean we're done. Guys, we need to get out of the idea of fighting and resisting and get into the idea of working. The next few years will be hard, day in and day out, but it will be the work that gets us to where we need to be. It will get us over that hill and back to a place that we like, we know, and we recognize. And so I want to say thank you again. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Taylor Lorenz, a technology and culture journalist. She's the author of The User Mag Substack newsletter, host of the podcast Power User with Taylor Lorenz, and author of Extremely Online, The Untold Story of Fame, Influence, and Power on the Internet, which is available wherever fine books are sold. Today, she is coming to us fresh off a big event about monetizing video there in Los Angeles, California. Taylor, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so you are in the middle of so many different things. The legacy media, as we have known it, is, I don't know, you tell me, is it imploding? Is it exploding? Is it atomizing? What's happening there, right? Have we experienced the Big Bang, or is it still to come? There is all of the post-election stuff of, the idea that the left needs its own Joe Rogan, but for having its own Joe Rogan, right? Maybe Kamala Harris wins. And then also understanding things that might go by the individual, but are very impactful, like even what emojis people use. So let's start with the bottom. Why do MAGA folks use heart emojis?
I just wrote a fun piece on it this week. It was mostly about actually Democrat or liberal people not wanting to use the red heart emoji because it's been politicized. They associate, or at least thousands of people on TikTok associate the red heart emoji now with the MAGA movement, because so many conservatives have been posting the red heart emoji to sort of represent Trump along with the American flag. And so I just wrote a bit about that and about how emojis are generally being politicized more and more, and why that is.
So is there anything in your experience now from your particular perch that isn't politicized? Can anybody just turn on an app or their phone or a computer and not see something that immediately drives them from one corner to another?
Well, we live in an increasingly politicized world, in part because the internet invades everything. And that's always been, people's lives have always been deeply political, right? We're all directly affected by these political systems that we live under. So I don't know if it's changing, but certainly with emoji, the heart emoji is sort of just the latest emoji that has received kind of like political, implications. But I'm really interested in language. I write a lot of stories about language. And I found this paper that I cited in my article that was saying, actually the emojis that progressives or leftists or liberals use just in their day-to-day lives differs from the emojis that conservatives use in their day-to-day communication. So conservatives were much more likely to use the 100 sign, like the $100 sign.
Yeah.
Leftists were more likely to use the peace sign, which is very funny. So it's just, it's like these emojis, or like the little green sprout sign, or the arm sign. Conservatives were more likely to use the arm sign. It was just like basically talking about how communication is increasingly like meme-based and visual, and how that affects things like emoji.
Well, it's interesting to go back 20 years to something much more analog. In fact, entirely analog. At the birth of what we used to call micro-targeting, right? It was this idea, Taylor, that if you drove a Mercedes and you drank Chardonnay, you were a Democrat. And if you drove a pickup truck and you drank Budweiser, you were a Republican. So I guess, 25, almost 20 years on right now, here we are. We're out of the analog. We're into the fully digital, to a place where, again, I got to be honest with you, I don't think I even notice. Right. I mean, if someone's here, I would say this: if someone puts a blue heart on something, okay, that makes sense to me. That would seem to me to be somebody indicating that they are a Democrat, left of center. They were going to vote for Kamala Harris. But I really hadn't thought about it in the context of the red heart, because the red heart just seems sort of ubiquitous to me. It's like, I love something.
It is the second most popular emoji. So
Right.
I think most people are not using it in a political sense, but you see a lot of this now. I mean, red was such a big color this year in fashion, and a lot of people on TikTok, women especially, have said like, "I'm throwing away my red suit. I don't want to wear red." They just associate red very heavily with this conservative movement that they just don't align with.
Well, yeah, as you can tell, the red fashion statement did not reach me, but that's not surprising. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. So, in the wake of the 2024 election, Donald Trump obviously not only wins big, is likely to capture the popular vote, and there was all of the sudden, should Kamala Harris have gone on Joe Rogan's show? And Rogan, obviously a very popular podcaster. I think a lot of our folks forget that, remember, he started on Fear Factor, where it was basically convincing people to eat cockroaches and this kind of stuff. And so he's had, I would say, an almost apolitical rise to fame and fortune. But now, like you mentioned with emojis, he's become politicized as well. Obviously, he has heterodox sort of views on a whole lot of things. I heard somebody say the other day that when Bernie Sanders went on, he got roasted by Democrats and the left for having, been on his show. Trump went on, famously spent 3 hours on there. And of course, because like all humans, people look for simplistic answers. The idea is, well, now the Democrats, or the left part of the political system, must have its own sort of parallel track to Joe Rogan and all of the true conservative podcasters, whether it's Tim Pool or Benny Johnson or Dan Bongino. And you wrote a really smart piece about this, in which you said, and I wrote one as well from a slightly different perspective, which is you're sort of missing the overall, which is these people get the funding they get because they are ideologically and economically aligned with the either donors or investors.
Well, I mean, first of all, Joe Rogan, I would say, unlike the emoji, which is sort of inherently neutral, like he chose to get more political, right? He got more politically engaged as he progressed with his show. And, to look at the media ecosystem, and by the way, how incredibly badly the Democrats managed their media strategy this campaign cycle, to kind of like look at that and then say, oh, well, the left just needs their Joe Rogan. It's like, no, you don't understand. The right has created their entire own media and tech ecosystem built to amplify their messaging. Not to mention, regular social media is also built to amplify right-wing messaging. There is no technological infrastructure to boost leftist messaging. There is no funding for independent media entities on the left. And the biggest problem is that the Democrats themselves won't even engage in independent media because they're like this sort of centrist ideology that they have been putting these candidates forward, and like they don't resonate with anything that young people really want.
And I would take it from someone who's nearly 50 and a former Republican, which is, you can say what you want about the ethos and the ethics of a lot of what the right-wing MAGA podcasters say, but going back to Rush Limbaugh on terrestrial radio in the 80s, it's entertaining. Like, they understand the nature of certainly the audio medium, and I think maybe the video medium too, the visual medium too, is you have to make it entertaining. You have to make it what someone wants to spend their time on. And the thing about Rogan is, again, it's not all politics all the time. He has all sorts of people on, and just like in the Howard Stern movie 30 years ago, right? People are like, why are they listening? Well, half the people listen because they love him, and the other half are listening because they want to see what he says next. And I think that's one thing too, that the left has a very sort of self-serious issue as well, which is everything has to be serious. You can't offend anyone. And as soon as you take that, it's really like sort of scoldy.
No, I mean, I would disagree with that, because there are incredibly entertaining people out there that don't scold, that don't offend, that, their humor doesn't rely on like saying slurs or offending people, right? You don't need to do that stuff to be entertaining at all. But you do need to be culturally relevant. Like, I mean, I think to really make an impact in the entertainment ecosystem, you do have to be relevant and tap into pop culture. And I mean, the left, generally Democrats, I mean, this goes back to like, there is a thriving ecosystem on the left. It's just everyone involved with it is leftists. everyone involved that is popular, that is a huge content creator or YouTuber or podcaster or whatever on the left, which again, because they don't have this funding infrastructure and because they're not mainstream through the Democratic Party, it's smaller, but they don't share the ideology of the Democratic Party at all.
Okay.
And so that's why, and like, that's a big part of, I think, why these Democrats don't engage in these spaces. It's like, because if you want to go to talk to relevant content creators, you know, that are left of center, like, you're going to be engaging with leftists. And the Democrats have fundamentally refused to engage with leftists in any sort of meaningful way, other than to say, shut the heck up, get on board. We don't need to cater an inch to anything that you're asking for because you're going to be forced to vote for us anyway. And you're seeing increasingly young people, and I wrote about this in 2020 and in 2022 and so on, like young people just getting really angry and feeling like, no, I'm sick of being told that this is the most important election of my lifetime. Like, the Democratic Party is increasingly out of step with all of these things that I want.
Listen, I mean, it's something I posted today. I was down at Duke probably 6 weeks ago speaking to the Duke Democratic Club. And one of the members asked me, where did I think they could get unbiased news?
There's no such thing, by the way. It doesn't exist.
No, I agree. But I thought it was interesting, to your point, though, that a member of, I mean, listen, Duke's an elite university. These are smart kids, but they're looking for something other than what their normal filter bubble is offering them.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to hear. I would say most people are not looking outside of their own they sort of expect news to come to them. But it's pretty easy to find information from opposing viewpoints on the internet. I think the problem is like most people get sucked in and don't necessarily do that, or they don't find thoughtful engage, right? Like, they're just watching Jubilee videos where it's like not really I don't know that it's like the most thoughtful content. But you know, whatever they can learn from, I think is good. So I support that effort.
Let me ask you this. So, you know, I went to a dinner a couple of years ago, and there was talk that some network was going to be potentially for sale, and it might take X dollars. And I said, okay, well, you know, Democrats have plenty of billionaires, and the person I was talking to said, no, you have to understand how Democratic donors work. They say, how much money do you need? I need $20 million. Okay, you let me know when you get the first 19, and I'll be there for the 20th. As opposed to Republicans, as you said in your piece, which are ideologically and economically aligned, which is, here's more money, take more money, go, go, go. And what really struck me was, not what these guys are saying, and they're mostly guys, Taylor, was all of them had really tricked out studios, right? Really tricked out gear, big tables, lots of chairs, all sorts of stuff on the wall. I mean, I'm here in my home office, right? Which is fine. It doesn't bother me. But it was one of those things that, like, how are these guys making enough money, right, to be able to do this? Now, I have no doubt that some of them make a pretty hefty penny, but at the same time, to have a standalone studio someplace, assuming outside your home,
editing, it's
right.
It's also the marketing, like the branding, the promotion, the collaborative market, like just getting boosted on bigger podcasts, like the conservative media ecosystem, like amplifies its own, it boosts its own, it really like welcomes people, like if you're an up and coming content creator, like a big name conservative politician will go on your show, right? To validate what you're saying. If they like your ideology, they're going to show up for your show, even if you only have 20,000 listeners, right? Whereas there's nothing like that on the left. And the condescending, I can't explain how condescending the entire Democratic Party has been towards young people on the internet for multiple cycles now. I mean, I covered the 2016 election as well. And again, Trump has not changed his strategy. Who was at the Hilton that night that he won in 2016? That entire room, and I was in that room, I was not at the Javits Center like a lot of reporters, was content creators and YouTubers and internet personalities. These are people that have always sort of like supported him, and Democrats still think that, places like the New York Times are relevant. It's like they're sort of relevant in a sense to certain people, but not really, like they're in a different world. And I say that as someone, by the way, that worked at the New York Times, and I have a lot of love for the people there, but like,
sure,
it's declining in cultural relevance.
Well, and, I'd be curious to see, and I'm sure they wouldn't, well, maybe they would tell us, Taylor's, how many people only ever go to the New York Times app, like I do, 70% of the time to play games?
Or for cooking, right? But they've built a good product. I mean, I think what the New York Times did that all these other news organizations did not do is realize people aren't paying for news. So let's build a product that's ultimately financially profitable and sustainable that can support a news operation. And I have huge problems with the New York Times. Like, I think that their reporting is, I mean, they just are incredibly inaccurate constantly and like to act like they're a paper of record, and it's like
Right.
they're not. But you know, the point is that it's at least this paying reporters, right? Like, all of these other places are completely crumbling. And we saw the death of digital media too, with, things like Vice and BuzzFeed and others like going out of business. These were news websites that, say what you will, were doing a lot of really incredible reporting. I mean, BuzzFeed did the first big story on Andrew Tate, who ended up being an incredibly influential figure even in this last election cycle. So we just don't have journalists around anymore, because there is no economic model that's sustainable, in part because these rich people don't fund progressive media.
So that's the other part too that you mentioned was, I got asked this question on Monday night as we're recording this, about why more people don't fund this sort of stuff on the left. And I said, because to be honest with you, the people that could fund it on the left and the people that do fund it on the right, their economics are largely aligned. Right? Which is the things that would be profitable, the things that would resonate with younger voters or even left of center voters that are interesting, fun, funny. Again, probably going to, be more populist in nature, at least economically, are going to be something that's a little bit more, outside the mainstream. It's going to be, we talked about it. It's not going to be as condescending. And so people are like, well, is that really what I want to pay for? And we see this in the campaigns too, which is, they love bright, shiny objects. They love show horses, but the workhorse, the one who goes out and does it every day and builds up an audience of 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 listeners, isn't that interesting because, well, I've never heard of them, or, they're reaching who? Well, I don't know those people.
Yeah. Part of why you don't know them is because they're not getting $2 million checks, like people hear of Barry Weiss because she's backed by billionaires, right-wing billionaires that just give her millions of dollars to run a pretend news organization that's losing money, probably, because it's, or eventually, I mean, some of these companies eventually become profitable, but only after they're subsidized. And, these billionaires have backed like national marketing campaigns and subscriber drives and things like that. There's no leftist content creators are not getting that support.
Well, it's interesting that during the, you and I first met in Chicago during the course of the Democratic convention, and there was a lot, there was a creator space there, right? And there was a bunch of mainstream news stories about the idea that, these content creators are getting all the people, they have their own area, and, we're left off in the press riser and all this other stuff. But then what seemed to have happened, and I actually heard from a couple of people on this, too, as well, Taylor, is post sort of Labor Day, the Harris campaign and the Democrats just sort of told the creators, all right, thanks a lot, right? Okay, can we get this person? No, radio silence. Can we get the vice president? Radio silence. Can we get Governor Walz? Radio silence. And again, a lot of these people, to your point, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, have a hell of a lot more people listening or watching them than, a New York Times byline of 700 words.
No, the craziest thing, absolutely insane, and whoever was in charge of this decision should be fired, was that they threw Hassan Piker out of the DNC at a time when Hassan Piker is the most influential left Twitch streamer. I mean, he is the only A-list Twitch streamer like that even talks about like democratic values. And he's a leftist. He's an open, proud sort of like Bernie Sanders, like 2020 supporter originally, right? Like, but he's had AOC on the stream. He's very willing to like hear people out. He would have he wanted to interview, Kamala and Waltz. Like, he wanted to have them on his stream. He wanted to engage with them. He was not even credentialed through the Creators for Kamala program for the DNC. He had to get in through his uncle who runs the Young Turks.
Oh, sure.
And then he had his space and they kicked him out. This is a man, by the way, that has a 90-something% audience of young men. The one demographic that they couldn't reach, it's the only man on the left that like is able to reach these like the type of men that listen to Rogan as well. And they kicked him out because he interviewed people, related to the uncommitted movement. It's like, you're doing this to yourself. Like, you're doing this to yourself. You lost this for yourself.
Well, and that's where what I wrote about vis-a-vis Rogan too was the idea, Taylor, that from my perspective, a lot of these podcasters or the digital media types are the end of the funnel, right? But they are downstream from decades worth of work and billions of dollars worth of investment up and down, the political spectrum, from the White House all the way to, front groups and everything else. But they're all in lockstep together. They're all interconnected. To your point, they're all self-supporting. And then you've got everybody else who's just trying to figure out an audience. And to your point, at some point, right now, I mean, I don't know how many Substacks I recommend. I don't even know how many Substacks I'm subscribed to. But at some point, right, people will go through, probably, I assume, not for this show and not for your show, Taylor, some natural culling, right? Of like, okay, well, I'm paying $2 a month to 25 different people. I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's already happening.
Right. So if the New York Times and cable news and the what we would have called the legacy media is now sort of imploding. You even saw Chris Wallace left CNN after 3 years because they wanted him to take a haircut on his $7 million a year contract.
That's insane.
Right. And he's like, no, I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm like, well, for $7 million a year, you can do your own thing. So tell me, how do the independents survive? Does it sort of become like a United Artists thing in Hollywood decades ago where the little guys sort of band together and create something bigger?
No. There's nothing like that on the internet because the internet is so disparate, right? You're talking about all social media users, all internet users. Like the internet really does give everyone a voice. I think we're just going to continue to see the rise of the far right as long as we allow the far right to control the tech platforms that we use, to control the broadcast mediums that we rely on to get our messages out, things like Meta, Twitter, like X, whatever you want to call it now, right? Like these platforms, we have seen many studies that have shown, even before Elon, that these platforms reward right-wing extremism. And not only do we not hold the tech platforms accountable, but we just allow this to happen, and we allow the right to build up, again, this entire independent media ecosystem because no one on the left wants to fund leftists. You have to fund leftists. You're not going to fund like these Democrat billionaires. It's like they want to fund these like centrist people that have no cultural relevance and don't speak to young people. If you want to speak to young people, economic populism is very popular among young people. Most young people, they just want like the things that their parents had. I mean, I think economic issues, again, it remains this big thing, right? Like this is why you had people, what states, there was some area where they were like voting for minimum wage and all of these like social safety net things, but then voted against Kamala. It's like,
yeah, right.
The
that happens
Democratic
a lot.
Party. Yeah. It's like, they're the party of the like rich billionaires, and young people, especially, like they just want to get a foot in society, and only one party is speaking to them through these podcasts, right? And through the media that they're consuming every day. And that's the right. And of course, the right is lying to them a lot of the time, but it's like they're the only one that's even talking to them.
I think I've said this to my listeners before, but if you went back to 2015 and 2016 and you listened to a Trump speech and a Bernie speech, and you took out all of the sort of things specific to those two personalities, they were both saying the same thing, which is there's a system, it's screwing you. Right?
And it's true.
And it's true, right?
And we
congratulations.
Are being screwed.
It
is. Instead of talking about that, like if Kamala went on and talked about that, like that's the thing. It's like people just don't think the Democrats listen to them or care because they're just a bunch of billionaires, and Kamala has time to hang out with other billionaires and these like A-list celebrities that are so irrelevant, right? But she's not showing up in the media that these people are consuming saying, listen, here's what I'm going to do. Like, rich people, right? Billionaires shouldn't exist. Like that's, she need not that she needs to say the most extreme things, but it's like, that's not even extreme in these days, right? It's like, I think we can all agree that we live in an incredibly like stratified society where the top 1% gets everything.
My sense of politics, but you might be speaking to culture here too, Taylor, is that I think that elitism to me seems to be the strike point. That you can say whatever you want about Trump and all, there's plenty to say about him. And you can say whatever you want about Rogan, but they don't really put on airs, and they'll take anyone who's willing to listen. right? They don't say you can listen, but only if dot, and you can listen, but only if this, and you can listen only if that. If you've got something you want to listen to, or even something you want to say, no matter whether or not it's sane or crazy, come on in, right? The door to their tent, is strange as it is in the funhouse circus that is the Republican Party and the American right, they'll take all comers.
And I thought that's what politics was about. I mean, like, this is what's so weird to me. And I wrote about this back in I think it was actually the end of 2019 when Bernie went on Rogan. And you had the Democratic Party officials like chastising him. I mean, you also had leftists chastising him. Like, as I said at the time, huge mistake, like delusional mistake. You cannot purity test every single, independent media person that someone like Bernie goes on. Like, they're going to have some more extreme ideas sometimes, and that's good. You want them to have extreme ideas more towards the left, right? Like universal health care, things like that. But you're not going to find the perfect media channel, and you need to go into these spaces and do audience capture, right? You need to go there and say like, hey, look, I hear you and I actually agree with you. And you might be interested to know that like Democrats do X, Y, Z, right? But again, this goes back to the fundamental political problem, which is that Democrats are out of step with young people and like what anyone under the age of like 40 or 30 wants.
Well, it's not. I mean, look, it's not even young people at this point, right? It's a whole bunch of people, and some of those people crossed the line and voted for Trump, and millions more just said, "Screw it, I'm staying home." After all, and look, I've been a never Trump guy since he came down the escalator. Didn't work, right? Didn't work. Like at some point, and I wrote about this, and here's my big slice of humble pie. At some point, you have to tell people what you're for. And I think to me, that's, again, as someone who's not a Democrat and not going to be one, after fighting for 5 years alongside them for what I thought was the greater good, I have a sense of liberation now because I can say, guys, what you're offering, people clearly don't want. If you had spent as much time, if you had gotten out of the DC office as much as I had in the last 3 months and gone and met people where they are, you could tell how out of step you were, right? They didn't dislike you. They were apathetic about you, right? It wasn't even antipathy. It wasn't even anger, Taylor. It was like, ugh, what difference do they make?
I think a lot of people feel that way towards the Democrats because they're completely, I mean, I can't even explain how out of touch is. And it frustrates me as a reporter too, because it's like you cover this every day. I mean, I covered this huge coalition of TikTokers in 2020. There was this thing called TikTok for Biden. And it was a coalition of some of the biggest content creators on TikTok, hundreds of them came together and they were like, you know what? This is our first time voting in any election. We really don't want Trump again. Let's just coalesce. We hate Joe Biden. We don't agree with anything that he stands for, right? Like we don't, he's not a populist. We wanted Bernie, but we'll do it. We'll hold our nose and we'll do it because he's promising that he's going to be a one-term president and he's going to do all of this stuff, progressive stuff. He gets into office. Not only does Biden not do any of those things that he promised and it's over basically, like, all of the people that voted for him for specific policies around social safety net and stuff like that. He blacklisted all of those content creators from the White House events because they were speaking out against, what's happening in Gaza. And some of them were actually too outspoken around climate change stuff too. And it's like, so guess what? None of those people, they didn't even endorse Kamala. They just were silent this whole election. Like they just said nothing.
Knowing what they were going to get.
I mean, ultimately, again, I think it's incredibly condescending of the Democrats and I feel this because like I'm a millennial, but as long as I'm alive, the Democrats have been saying that this is the most important of your election of your lifetime and shut up and no, you're not getting healthcare yet. No, you're not getting these things that everyone else agrees would be like pretty popular. Because like you just have to vote out this bad guy. And I think a lot more people are just like, you're the bad guy, like you guys are both the bad guys. We don't want any part of this system. And so then you've basically disenfranchised them.
That was the theme of a speech I gave Monday night, which was, I'm done with the anti, right? I've been anti everything for a long time. And it's not interesting. It's not exciting. The idea, Taylor, of, using words like fight and resist, I think is cosplay at this point. And that's the other part too, is it's, what we're talking about is pretty high level, pretty high minded stuff, but it filters all the way down to individual voters, which is No one's talking to them. I mean, Trump's talking to them in a way that sort of channels anger and resentment. Okay, it works. We've seen that. But no one else is there. I mean, listen, I don't want to speak. I don't want to paint with quite that broad a brush. I met plenty of local Democratic leaders who were out there doing their best. But they're also, pushing a rock up a hill, and the rock says DNC on the side of it,
It's just really sad. I mean, like I said, I report a lot about like internet and culture, and my first election that I was ever like involved and voted in, I think it was the original Obama like 2008 election, but it was a big deal and everyone was excited, and like there was excitement at least around him. But aside from that, it's just like, it's really just been like corporate. It's like, vote for this person that you don't want, but you have to have them because we decided that. And I just think it's not resonant with anyone. And like you said, it's the resistance thing has also been really exposed, I think, because as so many young people have pointed out on TikTok and so many content creators have talked about, like there's so many people that ostensibly claim to be liberals, but they seem to only want like their team to do things. Like they don't actually care about the policies because they're rich and they're just living in DC and they're so disconnected. They just like want somebody with a blue D in front of their name to be deporting people instead of someone with an R in front of their name.
I would say it's worse than that, which is they're apathetic if it's a person with a D behind their name, and they're performatively outraged if it's a Republican.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yes, that's exactly right. And I just think like people absorb that, people see that behavior online. Like I was going to write a piece, I haven't written it yet, but like about just all of these like resistance people and these people that made frankly millions of dollars off being like resistance people on social media. And Trump's second term is coming, and guess what? A lot of them are not even resisting anymore. Like they're just like, well, we made our, profit or whatever, and we're moving on because they don't care. They don't actually care about the policies.
Well, again, to me, it's how can you begin to explain policy if someone is so disconnected from who you are and you from them, and that's I get asked this question. And I know we're a little bit outside the scope of this sort of digital natives, but I get asked this question all the time, Taylor. It's just like, why are Democrats bad at messaging? And I say, because messaging is downstream of belief. And you guys either don't believe in anything, you can't agree what you believe in, or the things you actually believe you would never say out loud because people would be like, why would you ever believe in that, or why would you say it out loud? Right?
Exactly.
But the truth is none of you can figure, or you guys think you're all too smart and you can't agree on who gets to say the thing you believe in.
Literally exactly the problem. And you had people saying this, right? Like you've had people Hassan Piker, right? Like perfect example, has been talking about these problems from the jump. And you had other content creators like those affiliated with Gen Z for Change and others like talking about these problems and being like, please, we want to get on board with you. Like we're not necessarily Trumpers like at all. Like we really actually kind of want to, like we don't necessarily want the chaos of Trump again. And we would like to get on board with Democratic Party. And their response is just basically F you.
Yeah.
And so those people are like, okay.
And, just there's the fundamental lack of understanding of your coalition, right? Which is, if your coalition is mostly made up of people of color, whether or not they be Black or Latino or Asian, East Asian, South Asian, none of whom are the same, right? They are gradations. They're different nationalities, for Christ's sakes. They're different languages and different cultures and everything else. But you lump everybody into one bucket and say they'll care about this stuff. And they're like, that's not what we care about. Right. Or look, and you and I might have a difference of opinion on this. I thought it was bad politics more than it was bad policy. I said this to a group of people in New York City 3 weeks ago. You guys are pushing the idea that, college debt relief is the greatest thing since sliced bread. 68% of the country doesn't go to college.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, that college debt isn't a problem. It is. I'm just saying
a lot of those people don't go to college also because of debt.
Because they're not going to take it on.
Well, right. Or they just literally cannot. Like,
right.
I mean, it's not like financially even an option, I guess. Well, then a lot of them also get sucked into these like predatory systems. I mean, I think the college debt thing is also a good example of just like how people are struggling, right? People with debt are struggling. People that didn't go to college are struggling even more in many cases, or, everyone's struggling. And rather than look at this system and be like, damn, everyone's struggling. Like it is hard right now. Like We do not have the system. Like, why aren't young people having kids? Why aren't people buying houses? No one can afford anything. We're not, we have the worst like, what is it? The millennials or Gen Z is like the first generation to have a worse quality of life than their parents. And
I think it might be millennials. Yeah.
basically people under 40. And, you know, the Democrats' response to that is like, do you want Beyonce to come out and say hi to you?
Right.
Like,
I know.
no, we want, and we can like quibble over what's the best strategy to like eliminate those economic differences. But the point is, this is like why people held their tongue and voted for Biden, especially in the early days of the pandemic, because he was promising things like relief, like economic relief. You know, people were really struggling and continue to struggle.
If we can just hit the pause button for just a second on the celebrity thing, which I've never, first of all, as a former Republican, like, I mean, since Reagan left office, Taylor, like we never had quote unquote celebrities, right? We had country artists. Occasionally we'd, you know, maybe Bo Derek would show up, right? But like no one, and now you see the Trumpies like the Conan the Barbarian guy and Scott Baio, right? Like he still wins, right? But clearly, like the strength of the celebrity core isn't going to be the thing that wins it for you. And so it's like if you see George Clooney selling whiskey in Japan, like okay, maybe the Japanese will buy, you know, whiskey from George Clooney, but like voters are like George Clooney, like yeah, he's a good actor, but like what does he have to do with me, right? And it's always been interesting to me that the Democratic sort of elite have always over-indexed on the idea that these people, you know, are ever going to have any real effect on a voter's decision.
Yeah, I mean, especially these days, like Beyonce, like I couldn't even tell you about her personality. She doesn't even do media. Like no one feels like parasocially bonded to her. They care a lot more. They're like, she's also a billionaire. Like literally pick a person that's less relatable. Like she's not relatable. Nothing about Beyonce is relatable. And listening to her frankly talk about what voters should do, it's like this is the last person we should be listening to, truly. And I mean, I just think like it goes back to this relationship that people have with like their podcasters, or you know, I was talking to somebody for a story this morning who's a woodworker in Colorado, and he was just saying like, you know, I work with my hands, I work all day long, I just listen to podcasts, and I feel like I know these people, and
sure,
you know, they're not big podcasts, but when they say things like really liking what some of Trump is saying or whatever, right? Like you were like, oh, okay, well, I pretty much like that guy, right? And he's in my ear all day. And
well, and that's, I mean, look, the audio medium is incredibly intimate, right? It is, as you said, literally in your head all day. I mean, you know, you and I are looking at each other on video, but it's in 2 dimensions. You know, and if I was talking just to you, right, it would be a one-way piece of communication. Now, not to say that the audio isn't, but again, it's just so much different. And it always has been. And I think that's the other part too, is that, you know, look, I know video's huge, and, you know, other big, you know, video outlets are going to try and monetize and all that. But, you know, for a lot of the people that listen to me, you know, I'd love to think, Taylor, they're sitting there watching you and me on YouTube. But the truth is that they're making dinner, they're walking their dogs, they're in the car. And frankly, I don't care where they are, right? It doesn't matter to me. But again, you have to bring something that people are willing to listen to, because as you know, too, how many podcasts are out there? How many people are yakking into microphones all day? And there's so much to offer that if you're not bringing it, or if you're not bringing the thing they're looking for, even if once in a while, you know, they like, I don't really like that, Reed. You know, once in a while I see it in the comments. Then they'll go someplace else because there's plenty of stuff on offer.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I completely agree.
All right, so tell us, here we are, we're about to eclipse 24 into 25. What do you think the next, you know, couple of years in digital media holds for the world?
I think the media is only going to become more digital and more distributed. I think that, you know, I don't know, things are getting very like fractured among like audiences. Like you're seeing a lot more like nicheification. Video is becoming a bigger thing. Live streaming, interactive sort of online experiences are becoming a bigger thing. I think we're all just going to keep, I mean, look, this is a shift that's been happening for decades. Like the media is not getting less digital or less atomized or less, you know, online. So I think also generative AI is obviously, as everyone has said, playing a huge role and playing a bigger and bigger role. I think a lot of content that we're going to end up consuming in the future will just be automated content. I know, but sometimes it's, I don't know. I say that, then like, I don't know. I sometimes read these like AI generated news summaries and they're really easy to read.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, the next time I have you on, I hope it's sooner than later. Are we just going to have the Chat GPT version of Reed and Taylor talking to each other? And will anybody even know?
I know. I mean, I think the future is going to be, I mean, I think there will be a lot of media that's just automated. And to be honest, that it's probably fine, right? Like you don't necessarily need like a human. I mean, it's not good for journalists for sure, for those that are getting started and learning how to write like SEO articles. But so many articles, especially when I was starting out, that were like just really you're just writing for SEO. Like you might as well just have a machine do it at that point if you're Googling like what new shows are on Netflix, right? Like these are things that machines can do for us. Um, but it goes back to this idea of like, what do we expect from machines and what do we want technology to do in our society? And I'm a tech optimist. I believe in a better world through society, but we also have to think of like, as jobs are being displaced, we need some sort of social safety net for people. Because I do think I do think it's going to be kind of rocky economic times.
Well, look, and to that end, so much of what I have seen in the countryside of the United States, is now 20 or 30 years beyond or 40 years beyond. A lot of globalization, a lot of deindustrialization. This is a little bit before your time, but if you go back and you read Ross Perot's watch Ross Perot's 1992 infomercial about why he was against NAFTA, he called it all. He said, "This is what's going to happen. All these other countries are building up their infrastructure. They're figuring out how to make sure to take care of their workers and build their economy. And, you're going to hear a giant sucking sound on the way to Mexico." And he was right. And the problem, I think, Taylor, is that the promise was, we'll globalize. You don't have to do these jobs, but they never told you what job or helped you find that next job, and then hope that like cheap TVs would would make the difference. The problem is now you got a guy who maybe's been out of work for 20 years who stares at his cheap TV watching Fox News all day, just getting angrier and angrier.
Yeah. And people have a right to be angry. Again, we have record wealth disparity. It's really hard. Like and this is why you see so many young people too turning to scams, like turning to crypto scams or getting involved in things. I wrote a lot about like meme stocks and stuff. And like nobody expects, I mean, I'm not going to like Social Security is not going to be around when I retire. Like that's just money that's getting thrown away because like everything has been dismantled. It's like nobody can get health care. I mean, I can't even explain to you how many young people, which it's not something that's like, I don't think it's something they actively sort of think about because, when you're young, you think you're invincible. But I ask young people a lot when I interview them, like, do you have healthcare? And most of the young people I interview don't have healthcare or don't even know like how to get healthcare if they're 27 and just got kicked off their parents' plan or whatever. So there's just like things that it's like, and I think also I was talking to some other big content creators that were talking about the election and one of them had been in Europe and it's like you kind of look around at other countries and you're like, wait a minute. Like this place isn't that different from us. How do they have things like this guy was saying, just like all this paid time off that like we don't have in our culture? Like just people seem to be struggling less. And so, yeah, I get why people are angry.
A friend of mine, he and his family used to live in Germany. They lived in Germany for several years. And he's a guy who's done very well for himself. But he said in Germany, you sort of have the dictatorship of the middle class. Everybody has a very solid, not everybody, but most people have a very solid housing, healthcare, educational, occupational background, right? They're going to be able to do what they need to do. Not everything is equal. And actually the hyper wealthy are sort of like laughed at, like, oh, look how fancy you have to be. Right. Whereas here it's like, I mean, I was in Southern California over the weekend and, I'm driving my mother-in-law's car just to fill it up from gas. And like two teenage guys get out of a Lamborghini SUV. And I'm like, what? Only in Orange County, California. Right. Only in Orange County, California.
I mean, America's a crazy place. And in some places, like, it's amazing, right? We love innovation. We love stuff like that. But clearly people are hurting. Not just young people. I keep saying young people because that's mostly who I talk about and cover. But like, everyone is hurting economically. It's really hard. And we have no safety net and no support. And then you have these like billionaires come around every 4 years and tell you it's the most important election. And it's like, okay, but the price is just like tripled and my wage hasn't gone up in years and I still can't even take time off when I'm sick, which by the way, they never did anything about public health in so many, like it's all a mess.
All right. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been exactly what I wanted it to be. So thank you for that. Before we let you go, where can our listeners find you? I know you're 100% online, but where specifically can we find you so they can make sure to tune in?
Yeah, my newsletter is usermag.co. That is my newsletter. It's a tech and online culture newsletter. I cover a lot about content creator, new media world. It comes out 2 to 3 times a week. And I also have my own podcast that is called Power User, Tech and Online Culture Podcast. And my book is called Extremely Online.
Yes, go out and buy Extremely Online. As always, gang, you can find me for another 2 days on Twitter and TikTok at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA, on Says Us, SEZ.US, SEZ.US. Join me and Joe Trippi trying to build a social media platform for the sane. And as always, guys, you can find me on Substack as well at the Homefront. Taylor Lorenz, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Everybody else, we'll see you next time.